So, warm hello and welcome. And this idea of welcoming applies to our meditation practice as well. In that when we sit and meditate, we're also welcoming meditation. We're welcoming something to arise or to settle or unfold or to let go. We're welcoming the process. And what this implies, the idea of welcoming, is the idea that we are responsible to open the door. We're responsible for welcoming. And then if what is standing in front of the door, what's standing there, what wants to come in, what wants to arise and occur, is wholesome and beneficial, then we welcome it, we allow it to arise. If it's not wholesome, if it's not beneficial, then we, say, no thank you. No need to get involved, no need to pick it up, no need to make room for it. But to allow something to happen. And so the meditation has this wonderful dynamic between what we offer in terms of ourselves and what we do, and what we welcome, what we allow to arise, to occur, to unfold. And what the balance is between these two is variable. But that's part of the art of meditation, is finding the right balance. Sometimes clearly we have to engage purposefully, intentionally, and apply ourselves maybe to the breathing, or apply ourselves to letting go of thoughts or something. Because to not do so maybe means to just continue drifting off in thought, or drifting off into ways of thinking and being which are not useful. But if we're only the one who does, and is applying ourselves and think we're responsible, it's up to us to make more effort, then there's no space and room for the welcome, to allow something to appear, to arise, to come. And so this play of welcoming and allowing, the welcome is what we do. We prepare ourselves so that we're there to receive or to allow. And so this can play itself out with our breathing. In a sense, one half of the breathing cycle can be clearing the deck, or opening up, or opening the door. So the other half of the cycle of breathing can be allowing that cycle part to just unfold. Maybe it's different for different people, which they prefer. I prefer that the allowing, the clearing the decks, the emptying out, is with, that's what I kind of do on the exhale, the releasing. And then the inhale, there's the allowing the inhale to happen. There's allowing for meditation to unfold. It's allowing, it's getting out of the way and then seeing what wants to come. And this cycle of letting go and allowing, letting go and receiving. Welcome, letting go, and then welcoming. It could be the other way. Some people might prefer the other way, to welcome what happens as we let go, and to clear things away, open the doors as we inhale. And this can be done gently, mildly, just a very light touch, riding on the inhale and exhale. And in the way I was talking about it, to let go of thoughts, let go, release, relax on the exhale, and to welcome on the inhale. And then as meditation deepens, it gets stiller and quieter and more settled, then each of these movements of opening and then welcoming becomes softer and stiller and quieter until neither is happening. We're just there with experience. Maybe a little bit closer to welcoming, but even welcoming at some point is no longer needed. So, assuming a meditation posture, and in taking a good meditation posture, you can also think of it as a posture in which you're ready to welcome. And you don't want to welcome a guest by slouching or receding or making yourself small. You have more of a welcome if you are a little bit upright or big or fully present. So a posture of fullness, full presence, but a posture that's there to welcome our experience. And gently closing the eyes. And welcome a deep inhale. And release a long exhale. Like you're welcoming the air to come into your lungs. You're welcoming the whole body to expand. And then you're releasing it all, setting it free. So you're ready to welcome again. Then letting go, and then letting your breath return to normal. And to relax different parts of your body, holdings in your muscles. Perhaps so that your whole body becomes more receptive and ready to welcome, to allow. In some ways, tension in the muscles is a kind of resistance, holding back or closing down. And the simple ways in which we can relax, beginning of meditation, are ways to make ourselves more receptive, more sensitive. And then to settle into the body's experience of breathing. Perhaps with a light touch, gentle letting go, releasing as you exhale. Maybe ever so slightly, there's a fuller release at the end of the exhale. And then welcoming the inhale. A wide welcome that is not just welcoming the inhale, but is opening ourselves to allow it all to be here, without involvement, without getting caught in. Where there's space for all things. when you get involved in thinking, there's very little receptivity there to our inner direct experience. The welcome is gone. When you notice you've drifted off in thought, return to the welcome, the receptivity of your experience here in your body. A quiet receptivity, a silent welcome. Welcoming as you inhale, letting go as you exhale. as we come to the end of this sitting, to step forward into the world with clarity, with presence, with the certainty of really being here. And then with that clarity and certainty, being welcoming for others, allowing people to be how they are, and to listen and notice and see and respect people for how they are. As long as they're not hurting us, can we give them the gift of being respected? Meaning to see them again, to take a second look and really be present, so that we welcome others into an empty space of goodness, of heartfeltness, of openness, where they can be more fully themselves and be known for who they are. And just as we know ourselves, the Dharma begins to move through us. We begin to grow and mature and unfold. So when we help other people to be known, they give the experience to others that they are really known. Something is welcome, something shifts, something relaxes, something can open in others. May it be that what we learn in meditation practice can be useful as we meet others and relate to other people, and even when we read about them in the news. May that which is a profound knowing and receptivity and openness be how we meet others in our dedication to live a life that supports the welfare and happiness of all beings. May we contribute to the happiness, the safety, the peace, and the freedom of others. May all beings be happy. So today I'll continue to recount some of the stories that occur in the Suttas, the ancient discourses, texts that contain the teachings of the Buddha. And one of the reasons for these stories is that the stories often contextualize the teachings, or the stories highlight what's important about the teachings, and or illustrate them in some way. And so today's story comes from the second discourse in the anthology called The Long Discourses of the Buddha. And it's called long because these discourses, these texts, are relatively long compared to many of the others in other anthologies. And so the second one, and it's generally called in English something like the fruits of the renunciant life, or the fruits of the reclusive life, It's a samanya pala. Pala means fruit. Samanya means someone who's a recluse or a contemplative or a renunciant. Maybe it's a little bit like in the old days in English, we would talk about someone who's a religious. And a religious person, a religious, generally meant someone who's kind of dedicated themselves to a life of the religious life. And so this is someone in ancient India who dedicated themselves to a lifestyle of full-time dedication to the religious life of the times. And so it involves and this particular discourse, I think of it as being like an opera, operatic, and some of it is this huge pathos, this a display of, that involves a kind of a operatic kind of suffering that kind of is the context for the teachings. And so maybe, I don't know if I can describe the scene to be kind of, but as grand like an opera, but it begins with the greatest king of India at the time of the Buddha, a king by the name of Ajatasattu. And the king it was a full moon night, beautiful full moon night with a clear sky. And the king was on the high terrace on his palace, looking out across the scene above the treetops, the full moon and the beautiful light and clarity. And he's there with his ministers. And he's exclaiming how beautiful, how wonderful the night is, the full moon. It's wonderful to see. And then he asks his ministers, because who can I go visit? What spiritual teacher can I go visit? The spiritual teachers often gathered on the full moon with their disciples, so it was kind of a time to remember the spiritual life, perhaps. And so he said, who can I go visit who might bring peace to my distressed heart? And the reason the king's heart is distressed, and we get a sense that it comes up at the end of this discourse, we understand why, is that he became king by killing his own father. And this was troubling him. And so he wanted to go find someone who could kind of settle or calm his troubled heart. And so the ministers, 6 ministers, each of them suggested that he go see a particular religious teacher of the time. And each of them, the king said, no, I visited before, and what the person said didn't help. But this, a 7th minister didn't say anything, just was silent. And then the king at some point turned to that 7th minister, Jivaka. I think he was the king's, not minister, but maybe the king's doctor. And said, Jivaka, you're not saying anything. Do you have a suggestion of who I might visit? And Jivaka says, well, in fact, there is a religious teacher who's in town, nearby, in the woods, who has a really good report. Is said to be not only a wonderful teacher for other people, but a wonderful teacher for the gods. And the word God in ancient India also meant king. So it's either so wonderfully good for the gods, but also so wonderful he's good for the kings. And Ajatasattu was the king. And hearing this wonderful report about the Buddha, I guess he had never seen the Buddha, said, let's go. And so they assemble a grand pageant. He assembled 500 elephants. Maybe it's a little bit like the Bradley tanks of modern world. These ancient, the king would have all these war elephants maybe, but 500 of them were assembled for this, going into the woods to see the Buddha. And on these 500 was the king and his 500 wives. And this represents maybe the setting up a contrast between the largeness, the power, the wealth of this great king and his great involvement with sensual pleasures, which later you can see that's one of his primary occupations. And they march into the forest to go see the Buddha, and in the full moon night. And as they get into the dark forest, the king gets really frightened, and his hair stands up on end, and he says to Jivaka, Jivaka, are you taking us into the forest so my enemies can ambush me? Is this a trick? And Jivaka reassures him, no, it's not a trick. But it's so quiet here, and you told me there were 1,250 monks with the Buddha, and I don't hear a peep from any of them. Ah, that's because these Buddhist monks are really well behaved and quiet. They're sitting listening to the Buddha. So Ajatasattu gets off his elephant and does the final distance to where the Buddha is sitting by foot. But he says, Jivaka, where's the Buddha? I don't see him anywhere. And suggesting that the Jivaka is in the assembly with the other monks, but he doesn't recognize the Buddha. But then Jivaka says, the Buddha is up against that central pillar facing all the monks. So the king goes up to the Buddha and offers his greetings. And then the Buddha kind of picks up something. And he says, Ajatasattu, king, are you thinking of the people you love? And the king says, yes, I'm thinking about my young son. I wish he could be this calm and settled as these monks, these 1,250 monks are sitting here so peacefully and quietly listening to you. I wish my son could be this calm and quiet. And that's all he says about his son. But the audience who's watching this opera or listening to the story they know that the king killed his own father to become king. And they probably, because the story was told for centuries after the Buddha died, that the audience knows that Ajatasattu's son later then killed Ajatasattu to become king. So this patricide continued. So there's this pathos that's kind of in the air around the sutta. And then Ajatasattu asks the Buddha, what is the fruit of the renunciant life? What's the benefit of becoming a monastic and practicing the religious life? And the Buddha says, have you asked anyone else that? And he says, yes, I asked the 6 other spiritual teachers, but I wasn't satisfied with their answers. And the Buddha said, well, tell me. And one of them teaching was, there is no such thing as evil or badness or demerit, and you can just do whatever you want and you won't do any evil. Someone else said that there doesn't exist really, people don't exist, they're empty, they don't really exist, and if you chop someone's head off, it doesn't really, you're not killing anyone because people don't exist. Someone else said that the amount of suffering and pain that you have, and joy you have, is allocated when you're first born, and you just have to kind of just play it all out, and it's all predetermined, and so nothing you can do makes any difference. Someone else said that they didn't know anything. They didn't know. They simply didn't know if there was any benefit or fruit of the practice, and so had no answer to give. And someone else said they went on these teachings, and all the teachings you can kind of feel as these teachings are recounted, that for someone who killed their own father, none of them really settled the heart. None of them really touched him or worked for him. So he came to the Buddha, and he asked the Buddha then the same question. So then the Buddha said, he answered indirectly by asking a question of the king. The Buddha often did that rather than answering directly. He said, dear king, if you have a slave, so here's the most powerful person in the world at the time, and the Buddha's talking about one of the most, had least power, a slave. And your slave decides that there's another way of living and wants to do good in the world, wants to acquire merit, and not just kind of do this grunge work for the king on and on for the whole life. And so the slave goes off to become a monastic, ordains, becomes a renunciant, lives a holy life. What would you do? Would you insist on the slave coming back and being a slave? And the king said, no, if they were really living a renunciant life and a good life, then I would honor that person and I would bring them gifts and food and robes and support them. And the Buddha said, well, is this one of the fruits of the holy life, of the renunciant life? And the king said, oh yes, this would be one of the fruits if you live that life, freed from slavery. And then the king said, well, tell me something more. And the Buddha said, well, if someone was one of your workers, like a minister or something, and they left your employment to become monastic, what would you do then? Oh, I would honor them and give them gifts and support them and protect them. This too is a fruit of the renunciant life. And then Ajatasattu said, well, tell me, is there any other fruits of the holy life? So the third time the king asks, the Buddha then gives some of his own teachings. And there's an ancient tradition that you don't really teach someone until they ask 3 times. So then Ajatasattu says, well, as a person hears the teachings from the Buddha or some person like that, and becomes a monastic, a renunciant. And then they engage in the spiritual life. And as they engage in the spiritual life, the Buddha describes how what's called the gradual path of practice, the practice of morality, of cultivation, of concentration, all the way to awakening. And there's all these steps that are described, but many of the steps result in happiness and bliss and gladness and joy. And so the whole practice, once we get into the world of practice, of living an ethical life, there's the bliss of blamelessness. There's contentment. As we practice meditation and the hindrances abate, there's gladness that we're no longer enslaved by these powerful mind states. And as we enter into the jhanas, there's all this deep joy and happiness and tranquility of the jhanas that comes along. So the Buddha is describing this wonderful gradual path where there's all this benefit, this fruit and joy and happiness and well-being that comes along, all the way up to awakening. And when the king hears all this, he says, "Wow, yes, this is the fruit of the homeless life. I'm so inspired. From now on, I go for refuge to the Buddha. Let the Buddha be my teacher." And the Buddha kind of nods in assent. And then Ajatasattu has heard his great teaching and so inspired, he says something, well, I have a lot to do. The king has a lot of work to do and a lot of sensual pleasures to attend to. So I have to go back to my job. And something like that. And so the king says, oh, do as you wish. And then the king goes off. And the Buddha is left, and he tells his monks who are there, and monks and nuns, well, if the king had not killed his father, in hearing this discourse, he would have attained the first stage of awakening. His Dharma eye would have opened. But with this heavy, harm that he caused, the fruit of that, the consequence of that, is that, he didn't say this literally, but kind of my interpretation of it, the consequence of that is that his heart is closed to the liberative effect of these teachings. And so that's a fruit of causing harm in this world, that your heart is much more closed. Is it permanently closed or not? We don't know. My teacher in Burma gave lots of stories to me of people he'd known who, not that they killed their parents, but soldiers who had killed people, and the struggles they had to open up their heart, but they always succeeded to do it, to the teachings, and to be changed. So this contrast between the king and the consequence of his actions, and the choice of a monastic and the consequence of their actions, their practice, and what arises, what's welcomed, what's received, the fruit that comes from the spiritual life, is the theme of this operatic sutta. So, so that's the story for today, and we'll continue tomorrow. Thank you.